Everyone join in. I will pass over to Kishore Balakrishnan, who is marketing manager of ColdFusion at Adobe.
Thanks.
Great. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good, Gaurav. How about you?
Great, thank you.
Been a long day, right?
Been a long day, very much. And it's too early for you. Great, I'll pass it over to you.
So, welcome everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the panel discussion on ColdFusion application modernization challenges. The reason behind this panel discussion is like we see a lot of businesses spending a lot of money towards enterprise software and IT services, and much of this spend is dedicated towards maintaining existing enterprise applications that run their business. That's why moving legacy applications onto a modern infrastructure, such as clouds and containers, holds great promise to businesses that wants to reduce their IT spend and, convert the savings into a competitive advantage. But it's not as easy as it sounds. Modernizing applications definitely makes sense, if you do it right, and you just have to know how to avoid the pitfalls. And the panel that we have, I think each of them have at least 20 plus years of experience working with ColdFusion applications, and they would be able to provide you with the insights into what are the pitfalls that you should be look out for and how you should go about modernizing your applications. On the panel we have Charlie Earhart. Charlie doesn't need any introduction. He has worked with, I think, more than 1,000 ColdFusion or Lucy or Java shops, helping developers solve nagging problems. So if anyone is better suited to tell you what are the pitfalls that you should avoid, I think that's Charlie. Charlie, great to have you on the panel.
Thank you, Kishore. That's very kind.
And the next one is David Byers. David is working as a senior developer at Epicenter Consulting, I think with over 20 years of experience building custom web applications with focus on user experience and fluid and responsive design. David, great to have you on board.
Great, thank you for having me.
Yeah. The other person is Nolan Erk. Nolan doesn't need any introduction because if you've gone to any of the ColdFusion summits or any other ColdFusion events, you would see Nolan there. And Nolan worked with us in creating the certification. The course was developed by Nolan, and he again has 20 years experience in actually all aspects of software development. Hey, Nolan.
Hey, Kishore. Good to see you. Thanks for having me on the panel.
Thanks for being here, Nolan. And the last person the other person is Gavin. And no one could be more suited to be on this panel because he runs a podcast saying modernize or die. And Gavin works with Otis, whose products I think almost all of us would have used at one point or the other. And Gavin himself is an experienced web developer. He focuses on building better businesses through web application development. Hey, Gavin.
Hey, thanks for having me. Great to be on this panel of really experienced developers here.
Yeah. Great background, by the way.
Thanks.
And the last person that we have is Brian Klaas. Brian Klaas is a senior web systems designer at Johns Hopkins University. And he's one of the sweetest guys that I and most of the folks in the ColdFusion team love working with, because he is part of the content advisory board for all the ColdFusion summits, and his talks on AWS integration and stuff like that is one of the most attended in ColdFusion summits. Glad to have you, Brian.
Well, thank you for having me back again. My second time at speaking at Summit here today. So I'm going to keep my mouth shut a little more, let the others talk because they're much more intelligent than me.
You're too kind, Brian. So first of all, I want to kickstart this discussion by starting, saying that what does modernization mean for ColdFusion applications? So please pitch in.
Who's going to throw their hat in the ring first?
Gavin,
You unmuted
modernize or
first.
die.
Modernize or die, Gavin.
Yeah, well, of course, we have a little Luis Mahano influence on that name, I must admit, growing up in El Salvador. But yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to, ColdFusion. Obviously, we love it. We've been using it for 20 plus years, everyone here on this call. But yeah, the big thing is for the community to keep growing and the language to keep growing, we need new developers in. And our whole modernize or die thing is focused around trying to build new tools and share, get the word out. And that's part of the podcast, is to show people that we're still alive and kicking, and we're not some 25-year-old legacy beast. We've got a lot of great tools and a lot of great features out and about now that hopefully new developers will be proud to use and want to use. And so, modernizing, basically, we want to show everybody that ColdFusion can do everything that everybody else can do, but it's also fun and productive. I've always had that rapid application development tagline, but we can be efficient too. We have the tools out there now. We have all those things that everybody left in 2012 because we were missing package management. We were missing, smaller deployments. We were missing all those things. And now we have all that, through community involvement and also, Adobe stepping up, and, the new environment is definitely there. So modernizing to us means, tools to make your stuff more secure, to make your development process easier. And then, things like CFLint and all those other tools out there to make sure that you're pushing good code. You're pushing code that's well tested and secure. And with Docker, you guys have done great work with the Docker images. So now we can have, people who have no idea what ColdFusion is, they can still deploy stuff to the cloud because we're using Docker and modern technology. So that way we can really leverage, the rest of your IT team. So that's what it means to us. There's a lot of different points, but it's tools, code, security, those types of things. Really, that's why we're pushing on modernizing.
See, I think
good
that
point to keep in mind
modernization. Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
I think modernization, when you think about it, really boils down to a lot of reminding people that this is not your father's ColdFusion. The fact that and Gavin touched on it. There was a lot of attrition in 2012 because a lot of things were missing, and I think that stigma of what ColdFusion is and what it isn't needs to be broken, and modernization is one of the ways to be able to do that. Go ahead, Nolan.
I was just going to add on to what Gavin was saying. And one thing to keep in mind too for folks at the conference is everything that you mentioned is part of modernizing your ColdFusion stack. That can feel overwhelming to folks that are dealing with maybe larger legacy applications. For people in that case, don't worry about going from 0 to 100. Worry about going from 0 to 10. Figure out, okay, what can I start with modernizing? Does my app currently scale to multiple servers? Maybe I can just tweak that just part, or maybe I can move from table-based HTML to div layouts. So I've at least got a little bit more of a modern UI. And you can incrementally go modernizing with everything too. You don't have to jump into this and feel completely overwhelmed from the beginning and think you have 9 years of stuff to unclutter. Just break it down into chunks and deal with it in whatever sequence makes sense for your particular application.
And I'd also like to jump in, just say, sorry. I just want to say to the managers out there, and certainly to individual developers, to the managers out there, modernization is about giving your staff, giving your team members an opportunity to do something new. That's really what it's about. It's about, as Nolan said, finding these opportunities, not trying to go from 0 to 100, doing the big, giant, hairy, scary, audacious rewrite, right? Because nobody wants to do that. It's about, how do I set a task for myself, for my team, that makes sense, that can move us forward. So, I'm a big AWS person. I always talk about it. I always have to get it in there. Sorry. You say, Nolan was saying, how do you start making those small steps? Well, how about you get rid of all your local file storage and use the stuff that's in all the way back to CF9, basic S3, simple storage service integration, to not write anything locally anymore, to put everything in the cloud. Start there. It's a great opportunity for your team to learn about services like AWS or Azure, if you prefer, things about identity access management for permissions and security, which is the foundation of all the cloud services. And it gives you a different way of thinking about your applications and to scale them. because you're no longer bound to local file systems. You can have 17 copies of your main app because no one's writing to one C directory. You're writing something to the cloud. So it's about finding those opportunities for your staff and individual developers for you as well. It doesn't have to be everything at once, but if you're not actively seeking those opportunities, you'll never modernize. And I will say that, even if you aren't going to upgrade to CF 2021, there's lots of stuff in ColdFusion right now that can make it really easy to make those modernization steps and move forward a little bit at a time.
That's a great example, Brian, of the S3 kind of thing too, because that's a type of item that you could do it in parallel with some other related change in the system. If you have a new bug or request coming in from your customers saying, hey, we need more file storage, or please map what used to be the C drive to the F drive, which is the shared drive for everyone, so that we have more space available, or maybe the network traffic is apparently faster on that machine or whatever. You could sort of invisibly swap out those hard-coded paths with something as simple as a CF custom tag, and then just drop that custom tag into your apps everywhere. No need to jump, sorry, Gavin, no need to jump immediately into a framework and use Coldbox right away if you're not prepared for that at the moment. You could do things like pull out hard-coded paths, put in one custom tag, and then in that custom tag, do what Brian suggests, point everything to S3. And as far as your customers are concerned, the stuff is going to something other than the C drive. They just don't happen to notice that it's S3, but your system is that much more well architected than it was maybe a day previously. And then you can move from there forward into things like, well, let's turn that into maybe a service layer that has a couple other functions in it that do file manipulations that we need to do in our app. And then that'll get you, closer to being able to move everything into something like a full-on MVC framework like Coldbox. So you can break it down into chunks and add features like Brian mentioned at the same time, not just rewriting code for the sake of rewriting code. You can do it while adding value for your customers and your other developers on the team at the same time.
Yeah, I like to use the Boy Scout rule, leave it a little cleaner than you found it. And so if you're in that function doing something there, then take that opportunity to improve it in some way, because everyone has those nightmares. They don't want to touch that piece of code because they don't know what else it breaks. And those are the things that scares off good developers. And that's one of the biggest things we hear is, how can we keep good developers? How can we grow it? Well, you need to give them an environment where they want to work, and people don't want to go work at a minefield. And so, like you said, baby steps is good. As long as you leave it better than it was yesterday, you're improving. And that's sort of the big key. And, with Otis, we do a lot of legacy migration and we help people. And a lot of times we just give them the tools or give them the, the plan. And that's a big part of it is, look for those pieces that you need to upgrade or need to change, and then improve those as you go, baby steps. But as long as you work towards being more modern, everyone's going to win, and your team will be happier. You'll sleep better at night. Everybody will be happier.
Well, and I think one of the challenges there is we're taking somewhat of a utopian view when it comes to developers embracing new techniques or new ways of doing things. I know that there's a lot of developers that I work with that get stuck in their ways, and then once they're comfortable with the way that they're developing something, they kind of go use that as their go-to. So the idea of, well, how do I do that? How do I learn that new technology? Then becomes a little bit more of a mountain. And I think that it boils down to education. I think it boils down to easy documentation and lots and lots and lots of code samples. Real world type of code samples to be able to help developers get over that hurdle of, I don't want to do this way. I need to force myself to learn the new way of doing things. I had a guy that, worked with at one point who said, I don't ever want to see you use CF script. I only want to use tag based because that's what I know. And it took a while to kind of break that habit and say, there are better ways of doing things. It takes time, and there are a lot of developers out there that are resilient to those types of changes.
I would argue that those are the developers that have an easier time maintaining their career as well, are the ones that are more open to, changes and things coming along the way. Even if you stick with just tags, the type of stuff we write in ColdFusion today is not the same type of stuff you would have written in 2001, 2002. There are just different problems you have to solve now. More things happening on the internet than previously. It's definitely in everyone's interest to not feel stuck like I will only write in CF tags, for instance, or I will never learn a new JavaScript framework. I will never learn, MVC or whatever the bottleneck is that's preventing people from moving forward. And you're right, for the reasons you mentioned, and Gavin before too, they can feel like, well, I don't want to touch anything because I might break something that was written previously by another developer. I don't know how it works. I don't want to touch it because it's been there for 10 years and I can't break it. There are, again, iterative tools we can use to solve those problems. Things like Testbox, for instance. Some people, hopefully very few now, but some will think, oh, Testbox is only for testing Coldbox applications, but you can use that to test just a plain custom tag or just a CF include and get that to help bridge those gaps where you go from a legacy app into something a little more modern by putting those tools in the middle there. They're great things. We were chatting over email earlier about tools like Testbox and CF Script, I'm sorry, the TryCF and various other websites that we have out there now that'll help sort of bridge those gaps between things as well and solve some of those problems.
Charlie's been weirdly silent.
Exactly. I was about to say that.
Well, one reason was I didn't have my video on because I have really low bandwidth where I am. I mean, I'll be lucky if I've got 5 meg or 8 meg download and probably 1 meg upload. So I didn't want to share my video during my presentation earlier because I was doing screen share as well. But then I realized, oh, I'm not doing screen share. So seems like it's doing okay. I don't know. We'll see what it looks like. But so I didn't want to say anything until I came on screen. So I just want to follow up a couple things. As far as modernizing people's code, I mean, I agree with everything everybody said, but I just want to throw something that I made a comment during my Hidden Gems talk just earlier today is, CF 2021 is continuing the process of evolving CFML to itself be more and more modern down to the way you write code. So, you guys talked about how there was a lot of people that moved away in the past several years, and we hear it all the time where they're asserting that things can be, only done a certain way, and here's these other things could be done in other languages or other platforms. And if people would look at what's supported, CFML's evolved so much. Like you said, David, not your father's ColdFusion. I want to create a blog post literally with those terms. And, we've got functional programming, we've got parallel programming, we've got just so many ways to do things. And, maybe not everybody wants to start doing that if they don't currently. But the big point is if you are already familiar with that and you'd rather write that way, start finding opportunities to write that way. And of course you have to, deal with people who maybe in your organization would look at this much more terse code and go, wait, what's that supposed to do? But that's going to be good for them. What doesn't kill them makes us stronger. And that's a good thing. And then back to Docker, that too is really easy. And I just want to put a plug in that tomorrow morning, Dan Skaggs is going to do a talk on, it doesn't say Docker in the title, but it is basically an overview of how to get started using ColdFusion with Docker. And I've seen it. He gave it on the CF meetup, and it's going to be a very gentle, clear introduction for people. And I did one last year, and there's been a couple of, David's done some blog posts. So I just want to stress that part of the challenge too is getting people to realize that there's resources out there that will help them if they look at them to be able to do these things a lot more easily than perhaps they've been led to believe. I mean, so often CF people will go reading things on Medium or, Stack Overflow or whatever, and it'll not talk about ColdFusion. And they think, oh, I guess that doesn't apply to me. Can't do that. And it's like, no. Brian made a great point in his talk today on serverless, under the covers, it just gets converted to Java. So no, you're not going to find references to CFML in AWS Lambda, but it's going to talk about how to do stuff with Java. And you can learn about the pros and cons and challenges with that. And don't worry about the fact that it doesn't mention ColdFusion. Just take from it what you can. So that's the thing I stress with a lot of people is, find the resources that are out there. There's a lot more. You mentioned, David, the docs. One other thing I'll too say is that the docs in 2021, I mentioned this at the Hidden Gems, but not all of you were there. The pre-release beta release notes was 500 pages. And that 500 pages is lots of information about all the great new features. It's also a lot of examples, to David's point. So there are better and better examples. They're not as good as they could be, but they're better and better and more examples that we used to not have at all. So those are there. Check it out. Go nuts. Have fun.
And I just want to, another sort of thing about education, just to follow up really with what Charlie was saying about Docker in particular, is, yes, it's a sort of different way of thinking about, running a ColdFusion server. If many of us work in environments where we can't run CF 18 or 2021 inside of a production environment. Maybe we can't install it on our laptops at work. But if you can get Docker installed on your personal laptop or get Command Box installed on your personal laptop, you can start playing around, trying out all the stuff in ColdFusion 2021 today. Seriously, and Command Box, it's one line, right? It's like server start, at Adobe ColdFusion 2021, I think is what it is. And it's super simple. You just have to get, Command Box installed. It's a free download. Same thing with Docker and the Docker images. It's pretty straightforward to get started with. You don't have to worry about blowing up your existing ColdFusion installation. You don't have to worry about overwriting things. You can learn and play and grow even if the environment that you're working isn't giving you those kinds of opportunities. And just learning about those things will get you to think differently about what you're currently doing. And I think it's a really powerful way of moving forward when you maybe don't have the necessary resources to do so in your work and production environment.
Well, and speaking to education, I was very relieved to see on the schedule tomorrow that there's a 2-part series on getting started with ColdFusion and CFML that's going to be hosted by Damien. He's a great teacher. And, I think that that's one of the things that's missing is reminding ourselves that although most of the ColdFusion community has been using ColdFusion for over a decade or sometimes 20, 25 years, there are new developers out there that are like, what's HTML? What is it? That don't really know this. I talked to a guy just the other day that said, yeah, I'm taking a computer science course and we're just learning C++, but I have no idea how to do any of the JavaScript stuff or web stuff or any of that stuff. And I said, you check out this course, see what you think. And he's looking forward to tuning in tomorrow. So I think that education, that continually reminding ourselves that not everybody is, ready to push the envelope. Some people are still just getting started. And I think that's important to remember.
Yep, and a good thing too is that, remember, all those new developers don't have all the baggage that we have after 20 years. We don't have all the, we must do everything in tags mentality because they didn't learn that way. A lot of them are using HTML and JavaScript, and guess what? The logic is in JavaScript and it's all script, and the output is in HTML and it's all tags. And so most people coming in, it makes sense. And that's, again, coming back to we're bringing new developers in. We want to make sure it looks something like what they're used to, what they expect, and it'll be easier for them to absorb. And so that's one of the big things the engines have done lately. Like the scripts and tags are using spread operators and stuff now. I mean, like all that great ECMAScript stuff, is coming to it. So people who are already using JavaScript, because that's the most prominent language in the world, they come over to ColdFusion like, oh, I get it. Yep. And in my JavaScript group, I show them command box stuff that I've written all in script, and I try and get them to figure out what language it is, because they don't realize that it's ColdFusion until the very end. Good point. So we show them task runners and everything. Instead of having to write stuff in Bash script, we'll do it in ColdFusion. And like, oh, that's a cool function. Did you npm install that? I'm like, no, just hold on. And then at the end, I show them it's all ColdFusion. I'm like, oh, I didn't know you could do all this. And it's just like ColdFusion developers. They don't know all the things. And that's why Charlie's hidden gem sessions are great, because he shows a whole bunch of stuff. I'm like, oh, I didn't know that. I've been using it for 20-something years too. There's always something to learn. But I think the big thing is not just educating those who are looking for something, but we almost need to reach out to those who don't realize they need to look for something too. Because most people, like you say, they're happy doing what they're doing. They're happy in their own little world. And we got to, I think we have enough education out there for a lot of things. But yeah, that's why these summit sessions are great, because there are a lot of people coming to them, and we can give them some of the benefits. And, like, why should we modernize? And maybe that's another question we can answer. Like, we're talking about what you should do, but why? Why should they modernize?
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with most of the points that we had said. Most of the times, when it comes to ColdFusion, it's the perception. Like, I still remember 2 years back, we were at one of the conferences in Atlanta, and Brad Wood was in our booth. And that was a typical Java conference that we had sponsored for the first time. So most of the folks who walked in were like, oh, is ColdFusion still on? So the perception that they had was Adobe had stopped development, or there was nothing that anyone is working on ColdFusion. They didn't know about what amazing work Otis is doing, what what are the new stuff that is there in the product now that they could take advantage of. We even had a couple of folks who were like, yeah, we had a couple of applications which were written, 10, 15 years back, but it's still working. So we don't want to do anything. We still have ColdFusion application, which is built on ColdFusion, is still running, but we don't want to touch it because, hey, it's working. What was really surprising was at that time it was CF 2016 and they were on 2016. But they didn't do anything about the application. The application was still running on 2016, which was built, I think, on version 4 or 5 or whatever. But they didn't do anything to modernize that application. So I think it's a perception that, ColdFusion is remaining where it was when they left.
That has been a challenge, probably more unique to ColdFusion than other programming languages and tech stacks out there. For instance, Apple, I know it's not a programming language, but the Apple environment has always been, here's our new operating system or our new whatever. Some of your old stuff is going to work fine, and other pieces of it, too bad, so sad, you're going to have to buy a new application, buy a new something, change things to get it to work on the new version of our platform. That's just the way it is. And to Adobe's credit, there's been very, very little over the 20 plus years of ColdFusion that has had to change. If you wrote an app on version 1 or 2, odds are really, really good that it will still fire up and function on 2020. You won't be getting as many of the technical advantages that you're paying for with the 2020 license, like using the new operators like Gavin mentioned earlier, some of the object-oriented programming concepts, integration with various sort of other platforms and things. But you can basically copy and paste most ColdFusion apps from a version 2 server to a version 2021 server, and it will just work out of the gate. So that part of it has been really good. But the downside to that is also, if I can see how some developers will look at it like, well, if my code still works on 2021, why would I bother learning how to change anything? Exactly. I'm not going to waste time rewriting a thing that is still working just fine on that machine. And so we need to figure out how to change those perceptions.
Well,
depending on what the application is. Sometimes it's okay, then you go for it.
No. So I'll say in the context of ColdFusion, Nolan, the answer is, what's the advantage of going from, ColdFusion 2 or 4 or 11 to 2021 or even 2018? I'll tell you, it's the performance monitoring tool set. I can't tell you, as someone who runs multiple ColdFusion applications that are mission critical, what a huge step forward that was. Now, I know a lot of people have been using Fusion Reactor for a long time. Fusion Reactor is great. It's also another really good option. There are people who do logging to systems like Datadog, via, they put jars in their ColdFusion lib directory and they do that. That's cool too. But just getting that level of observability is so important and so useful for troubleshooting and monitoring. Are my servers going to go down? Why are requests taking so long? My average response time is up to like 7 seconds. Oh, it turns out it's this one CFM page that that's being called in here because it's doing something ridiculous, or it doesn't have enough memory allocated to that machine for that particular task, whatever it is. ColdFusion was very much a black box. Certainly with the old, server monitor tools that we had, it was certainly a black box and not particularly useful. But that performance monitoring tool set comes bundled with 2018, it comes bundled with 2021. It can provide a real wealth of data to you as someone who has to be responsible for maintaining applications. And, if you're not gonna make any changes in code at all, because sometimes it's scary and difficult to get through, just having that monitoring through tools like Performance Monitoring Toolset or Fusion Reactor is a huge leap forward in terms of modernization, because you can actually see what's going on in your code and take action and remediate things that are going on in your code because of that data.
Yeah, I think that the perception issue, though, is still something that's very difficult to overcome, especially for a lot of enterprises. When I first started using ColdFusion, I was using version 4. And from the moment that I picked up ColdFusion, I had other developers telling me, oh, what are you doing? Why would you use ColdFusion? It's a dead language. It's dying. And I've built a very good career off of that quote unquote dead language, and have enjoyed every moment of the ride. It gets frustrating sometimes having to defend the perception, and I believe it is just that, the perception of ColdFusion as an older language that is supposedly dying. The silver lining, and I tell this to a lot of people, is that frustration is born out of passion. If you're frustrated, it's because you care. So when I get frustrated at other developers or other companies that say, I don't want to use ColdFusion because it's old, it's antiquated, it's not worth upgrading to. We want to go to something else. We want to go to something modern. We want, you know, my frustration from that is born out of passion. And it's because I want them to understand and know the reality of the situation that I keep pushing for that sort of situation, for them to be able to use ColdFusion and modernize it and use more modern tools and new techniques, because that's what ColdFusion is. It is a modern web development platform. It is a modern application development platform. Now with ColdFusion 2021, it is a modern cloud development platform that is super easy to use. You know, that has real value to enterprises. And I think that that's a message that really needs to be hammered home.
Yeah, I feel bitter now that Ruby and Python and JavaScript get that old "you're dying" stuff too every once in a while. So it's not just us. You know, when Ruby started getting the whole diff thing, I was like, yes, maybe they'll shut up a little bit. You know, but but yeah, it's going to be a hard battle forever. And the thing is, yeah, I mean, I don't really look at PHP or any of those other languages because I'm not interested in it. So I don't know what they're doing. I hear stuff now and then, but I mean, I know they're alive. So same thing applies. You know, you use what you're using, and you know, we don't pay too much attention other than what noise we hear. And so, I mean, the best thing we can do is just keep using it and build better apps. And you know, the sad part is now that we are modern, you don't see that .cfm everywhere, and so that's the hardest thing, right? Because everyone who sees a .cfm app think, oh, that's running ColdFusion. We stopped seeing .cfm, so there must be no ColdFusion apps anymore. And that's the sort of the sad part is, no, we're modern apps now. We have routing, you know. So
Yeah,
well,
and
on
that
top of that,
unfortunately draws a spotlight onto
base.
the bad ColdFusion apps because they're the ones that have the .cfm visible in the URL still. So people might view this page source on those pages in the website and go, "Oh, it's all table-based HTML still. This ColdFusion must be bad at what it does or whatever." Whereas you're right, Gavin, it's all been hidden behind URL writing now and containers and such.
But I think that drives home the importance of growing the developer base. You know, many years ago, I had a company that I worked for that said, look, if we put an ad out for a ColdFusion developer, we might get 2 or 3 applications over the course of a month. Whereas if I put an ad out for a PHP developer, I'll get flooded with applications and they'll be cheaper and so on and so forth. And yeah, the quality was crap, but you know, there was enough of a developer base that companies weren't saddled with the HR problem of being able to find a developer. And I think that a lot of that is resolved now with you know, CF script being 100% ECMAScript based or compatible, because you can take a developer that knows JavaScript, you can take a developer that knows another scripting language and convert them to a ColdFusion developer very quickly and easy.
That's always been the case, though. It just hasn't been as transparent in the culture for some reason. Like, there are only so many ways to write an if statement or a for loop. The concept of an array is pretty much the same thing in every programming language. Like, yeah. It's theoretically been possible to take a CFML developer all the way since the 90s and train them in a week or 2 to learn how to do PHP, or the opposite. Take a PHP person, if they understand fundamental programming concepts, you know how to write modular procedural code, you know what a for loop is, you know what variable scoping things mean, you know what a database does. Learning the new syntax, whether it's tags or script, has never been that big of an issue. The differences in a good developer and a bad developer are not whether they use PHP or ColdFusion or something else. The good differences are, do they build well-architected applications? Do they understand things like thread safety and race conditions? Do they know why you should not have a query inside a loop? Whether the loop is written in PHP or ColdFusion or something else doesn't matter. The idea is, don't have a loop that connects to your database 85 million times and your app won't be slow. For some reason, those concepts, though, get sort of lost in the weeds when you deal with things like you mentioned, like HR departments and such, where they're looking for the word ColdFusion on a resume. And that's where you have the gap that needs to be resolved. Something has been gotten better with the scripting being more prominent at some companies, but when you have an outfit with more of a legacy CFML application where they're still using tags on everything, the syntax difference is a little bit wider still, and the mentality might still be a little bit gapped as well, being able to go from the tag stuff to the scripting looking things and whatever, my opinion.
Yeah, and also, sorry to be changing tracks. So according to you guys, what are the tools that, you know, any ColdFusion developer should have, should know when he's modernizing applications? I know Otis has an amazing toolkit which we could use. But just quickly, if you could call out some of the tools which people should know to take advantage.
Well, I'll call out some non-Otis ones then. So like CFLint, CF Format, the Code Checker. Pete Freitag's got a bunch of them, like CFScript.me if you were wanting to convert over the script, HackMyCF, FuseList, FuseGuard, Fixinator. I mean, there's a whole bunch from Pete alone, but like John Berquist as well has a lot of those tools. But those old tools, help make your life easier as a developer. Help make looking after your site be more secure. And those things are what I think are really important. And those are the benefits you get from modernizing with some tools like that.
I think we should probably also mention CFFiddle and trycf.org as web-based ways to be able to run ColdFusion code and be able to test things, along with cfdocs.org. To be able to educate yourself on the differences between all the different functions and platforms.
I know Gavin didn't want to mention order specific stuff, but I really think command box is a significant tool in that workflow as well. If for no other reason than installing that gives a CFML developer the same general workflow that JavaScript and Python and .NET developers have. You type a couple things at the command line and boom, my app has been scaffolded out. You type a couple other things and packages get installed from some sort of cloud repository place that I don't really care about. It just downloads the jars and the zips and whatever that I need, and they're done. And that sort of workflow is very, very similar to the way modern JavaScript developers work. .NET has their own version of that now too. Python and lots of other modern tools have it. So just getting out of the idea of ColdFusion being its own, insulary thing that doesn't talk to the outside world in the same way that JavaScript does is a good way to sort of break down those barriers and show people like, no, the stuff you've been doing maybe on the JavaScript end of your apps, you can do that exact same sort of command line magic here in the ColdFusion space and get the same sort of results.
And no discussion of modern development would be complete without bowing down to Visual Studio Code, VS Code, of course, very popular now. And we should clarify a couple things. One is, there's a lot of CFML developers out there who aren't paying attention to this stuff, don't know about that, don't realize how powerful it is, how it's used by so many development platforms, development languages, and it's got so much power and capability that we'll be able to leverage, even though 90% of 95%, 99% of people using VS Code wouldn't know anything about ColdFusion. There is a CFML plugin for it. More importantly, Adobe has announced that they're working on a new Adobe provided CFML plugin. And I think it's been said that CF Builder 2021 will be a Visual Studio Code plugin, or it'll be a standalone for those that, liked how CF Builder hid the fact that it was Eclipse and it was just an ID for ColdFusion. I gather that's the plan. And so, whichever way that goes, my point in bringing it up now is to stress that you can learn so much about modern development practices by watching what goes on with people writing about things in regard to VS Code, and you'll be able to do that now with ColdFusion. You can do it now with the available plugins. And also, let me just throw out again for the sake of those who are totally foreign to it. You might think, well, nobody is. No, trust me, they are. They're still using Dreamweaver. Trust me, they're still using HomeSite Plus, ColdFusion Studio. I see them. I work with people every day. And those people may not realize that VS Code, Visual Studio Code, is not Visual Studio. VS Code is not something you pay for. It's free. It's from Microsoft, but it's got a tremendous community behind it and a very strong CFML community of people using it. So you will advance your street cred and your technical abilities if you start getting into using VS Code now, even before Adobe comes out with 2021 Builder.
And if you want some extensions, and that's like the coolest thing about VS Code is everyone's like, what extensions do you have? On the CFNL News podcast, every week we spotlight a new extension or hint or tip. And right now we have 77 episodes out there. So there's 77 different extensions or hints or tips on VS Code. So there's a lot of great ones out there that, people from the community are sending them in. So I don't have all 77 of those installed. I can't find them all myself, but there's a lot of great ones I'm using. And there's a lot that the community members give us every week. So there's a lot of great things out there. Some of them are little teeny tiny things that just, make your life a little easier. And other things are, like full on tools inside of VS Code So yeah, there's definitely a lot of great things in VS Code, and it does make your life easier. You know, a lot of people use Sublime and stuff, but yeah, it's a very cool tool.
And speaking of resources, that's another great one, is the CFML News podcast that Gavin typically, or Ortis does every week on Tuesday. You know, that's a great way to be able to learn new things about ColdFusion, what's going on, you know, find jobs, learn about new extensions. They talk about everything that's going on in the ColdFusion world. So it's another great resource to be able to pick up and figure out what's going on in the community.
I'd like to go back to something Charlie mentioned real quick, where he said developers might not be aware that Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio are different tools. He sees a lot of people on older IDEs. Related to that, another tool that would help modernize things if people are not already using it, please use source control if they're not doing that. I know I've dealt with a lot of shops before too, where I'll kind of do a quick poll at a room when I'm giving a talk at a conference. Is anyone here unfamiliar with Git or unfamiliar with GitHub or source control? And more hands than I was expecting will go up in the room sometimes. Git and GitHub accounts, you can set those things up for free. Most Git clients you install on your laptops are also free of charge. You can get a lot of productivity done and try out a lot of features in Git and figure out how to start using source control for your apps without spending any money whatsoever. I give a presentation sometimes at the conferences called Git Source Control for the Rest of Us, where I sort of walk through how to do some of that stuff from a GUI perspective too. So there are a lot of tools out there that do it from a UI perspective with tools that look a lot like other things you're already familiar with. And there are also command line option tools available to do your Git source control stuff. You don't have to do one of those environments or the other if you don't, you know, feel comfortable in them. You've got a variety of options for that sort of thing. And if nothing else, like, just don't FTP files manually up to your servers anymore. That'll be a good small change people can make to start getting more modern from there. Just make that not a manual process anymore. Use something like a Git webhook to say, I'm done changing this file, and then let a Git process move the file for you, or a Jenkins process or something else, rather than a human FTPing files up and down. That'll free up a point of error on your applications, or, well, it'll be prone to manual error, and you'll actually solve a couple security holes doing it that way too. And that's a really easy thing people can start doing to make their apps more modern if they're not already.
Yeah, but once you're using source control too, almost every single source control tool out there, you know, they have built-in pipelines, and they're all really good. You know, like, we use a big variety of orders, working with a lot of customers, but they all have great tools, and there's a lot of templates out there, and there's a lot of code out there that people are sharing using CFML to show people how to run tests with TestBox against it, you know, how to copy your code up, or, you know, use CFLint or other things. And that way you're just making sure the code you push is a little more tested, a little more secure, a little more safe. And yeah, so no matter what you're using, if you're using Bitbucket or GitHub or GitLab or whatever, there's a pipeline tool that'll help. And even if it just does an rsync to rsync your files up, or, you know, whatever, it's still, like you say, Nolan, just takes that manual process out, makes it a little more automated, a little more secure. It's definitely a big win.
These are all really good points, guys. Any special advice that you guys want to give to folks who are considering, you know, modernizing their applications? You know, I know Nolan spoke about, you know, try not to go from 0 to 100 in one step. Take baby steps. Are there any other major pitfalls? Are there any major gotchas that they need to look out for, in your experience?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. I think a lot of developers still feel uncomfortable posting on forums saying I'm stuck. They feel uncomfortable raising their hand in conference sessions. Whatever the situation is, they just don't feel like they should say they're stuck or behind the times on certain things. And I think this is your career, and I haven't met anyone in the CFML community in a long, long time that isn't willing to help, you know, move other people forward. It's not like if Brian learns more about ColdFusion, I'm gonna not have as good of a chance going after his job. I don't want Brian's job. I want my job. No one here is competing for the same, you know, positions as software developers at other companies. It doesn't work that way. Like, us teaching other developers how to improve their skills is good for everybody. You learn something new and share it with who doesn't know it yet, and then they can learn something new by that conversation, and they can share it with other people too. And that just moves everything forward, and that will help get rid of some of the stigmas we have, like ColdFusion is a dying language because everyone writes old spaghetti code with it. If everyone learns and then teaches the next generation or the developers just sitting to the left and right of them how to do good code as well, it makes everything move forward better. So like, yeah, always ask for help in whatever context you feel most comfortable doing it. Please don't be quiet if you need help with something.
And when it comes to modernizing an application, I mean, yeah, you really do have to check your ego at the door and ask for help when you need it. Take off smaller chunks when you can, to be able to have that incremental modernization of your application. One of the big things that I've found is really helpful is doing a proper discovery. You know, take a couple days to figure out what it is that you have, what it is that you're going to move to. You know, a couple times it's been mentioned that there are applications out there that have just been sitting because it works, and we don't know if we touch anything, if it's going to break. Figure that out. You know, do the reverse engineering on those older applications and do a proper discovery process to create a scope of work that's going to be small, digestible, and attainable. You know, we all get that little endorphin rush when we complete a task. Make it so that those are happening frequently. You know, smaller amounts, but quite frequently. Little chunks that you can bite off and digest, make it happen.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing. I've noticed a lot of people don't have the right environment setups. You know, a lot of people working on a shared dev server where if they break something, they break everything for everybody. And like Brian said, Command Box is great and Docker is great for getting that set up locally. And if you can set up your app, and I think this would be a goal for people who want to modernize, is set up your app so it can work on different environments. That means like figuring out the file storage situation, figuring out environment variables. So the data source might be named differently on your machine versus another. If you solve those problems so you can have it running on your machine or someone else's, most of those things you fix will also help you when you go to deploy to, you know, maybe deploy to 2 or 3 instances somewhere. If you want to move to a different provider, you know, I think those things will help people, because I feel like a lot of people who are stuck in their legacy world, they only have one or two servers. You know, they have a dev server, and if they break it, the entire dev team's sitting around twiddling their thumbs. You know, so I think if people can move towards, you know, more isolated instances like that, then you'll have more opportunity to play with it, like David said, to take it apart and do a little test or whatever. So I think that's a sort of a big goal. And if you solve those problems, you know, worrying about where are my files going to go because I don't have C drive on this machine because I'm on a Mac. You know, if I'm running things and my data sources are different, well, if I had an environment variable, that might solve that. Those types of things that you're solving will help you as you go down the road, moving towards Docker later, or even just a VPN install if you want to script it later, you know, something like that, where, you know, some of those problems will help, and then you're not so worried about breaking it. And, you know, worst case, just do a git checkout on another command box folder, and away you go again.
Brian, I thought you might say something, but if you won't, I want to follow up on what Nolan said about not being afraid to, you know, ask for help and point out the many different resources that are available for finding help. So starting with Adobe, you know, there's the ColdFusion community forums, and just Google ColdFusion community forums and you'll find the link. There's the Adobe ColdFusion portal, and again, just Google that and you'll find it, but it's coldfusion.adobe.com. Very easy to remember. And the portal has discussions and blog posts, and you know, there's people, David's shared articles multiple times this year on aspects of modernizing. So you can find people have discussed some of these topics there. And then really we need people to contribute more resources that show off doing things like this. You can even do videos, by the way, there. We haven't had too many people do it, but when I say we, I mean, I watch it very carefully because I learn lots of great stuff every day from what's posted there. But then I also want to say that, you know, everybody's got their different styles. So there's also a CFML Slack channel. If you like Slack, there's a CFML Slack, very active, lots of people there ready to answer your questions. Twitter, there's, you know, Adobe's got a Twitter account. I think each of us do. There's a ColdFusion, a # ColdFusion hashtag. So there's lots of ways to reach out to people that way. If you're into Facebook, there's a Facebook ColdFusion Programmers. I think it's called CFML, Facebook CFML Programmers group. Again, very active group of those people that prefer that way. I just want to stress that there's so many different ways you can find help, whatever suits your style. And on some of you know, I've got a site called cf411.com, showing my age there because some people are like, what's 411? Yeah, it's the way you used to get information. But anyway, so on the cf411.com site, I have about 170 categories. And one of the categories, it's two broad categories of tools and resources. And in the category of resources, one of them is CFML community resources. So I've got links to all those and others that I'm sure I'm forgetting.
I can speak from experience and say that Brian Klaas will answer any tweet that you send him as best he can. He's great at that.
I try on rare occasion to do that. Yes.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
that's
but
one
reach
thing
out.
about
So,
our
and I just actually
community.
want to follow up on something that David talked about and Gavin referenced. So part of one of the many things I do for Johns Hopkins is I work on accessibility issues, web accessibility, educational content accessibility. And an institution as large and cavernous and sprawling as Johns Hopkins, this is a real challenge. And people automatically, when we talk about, you got to make your stuff accessible, they're like, I ain't got time for that. This is too much. I can't do this work. It's way too much for me. And what I like to say to them, and what I would say to everyone else, everyone here who's thinking about, modernization and it sounds overwhelming with Git and VS Code and, AWS or whatever the things we've been throwing out here today, is that ultimately a little plus a little equals a lot. It's just about taking that first step, learning that first thing, making that first change in your workflow. That puts you on the path to modernization. And it's amazing how much more productive and better you'll feel about yourself as a developer and using these techniques when you start just adding one at a time to everything you do every day. It's not about going from 0 to 100. It's about those manageable chunks David was talking about. It's a little plus a little equals a lot. And eventually, faster than you realize, you'll feel like you're using modern techniques and you're running with the big kids when you're developing your applications. And it's enormously satisfying and it has enormous value and impact on the products you create.
100% agree. None of the people on this call, just for the folks listening that are feeling like they're still behind the times and stuff, none of the people on this call started writing code on day one, understanding object-oriented programming and full MVC architecture and containerization. That's not a thing. Every one of us here started with the same stumbling blocks that every other developer on the planet started with. We all made typos on our for loops. We all got lost trying to figure out what our first component was supposed to do. It's a learning path for everybody. But yeah, just take those incremental little steps like Brian mentioned, and it does get easier and you get more productive over time.
I had a manager one time who literally sat me down in a code review and said, David, I could eat a box of alphabets and poop better code than you've written here, except he didn't say poop. Yes, I have written some garbage code. I have programmed like a drunken baby, but it's iterative. You have to keep going. You have to keep trying. You have to just learn wherever you can and hit up resources. One of the people in the chat, David, I don't know if it's Bellinger or Belanger, mentioned that you should join the groups for every programming language that you are using. Yeah, there are jQuery Slack channels. There are jQuery Facebook groups, plus Node, plus Vue, plus whatever else you're using. None of us only uses ColdFusion anymore. We all use a multitude of languages. So make sure that you're picking up and learning from all of those different sources.
I think we are close to our time slot. So just want to quickly highlight a couple of things that Adobe has been doing. So to fight the threat perception, I think we as a BU have been reaching out to all our large customers and getting on a one-on-one discussion with them to talk about what are the new features that has come up with. And we have had significant progress after the calls that we did. And most of the times the CIOs will be like, hey, this is not what I have been told. So our humble suggestion is that, see what is available in the newer versions than what you already have. And obviously listen to the great talks by you guys to see what is possible using ColdFusion. And if people could take that to their upper management and say, hey, this is something which we could do, I think that is a good positive first step as well. And with that, I think we are close to our time, guys. Really appreciate you guys taking the time out. And I know for Nolan and for Charlie, this is the second session of the day today. And thanks, everyone. Guys,
Yeah, thanks
have
for
a
having
rest
us.
of the wonderful.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for having such an amazing discussion.